Welcome, everyone. We are here with Senator Tom Tiffany, who is running for the 7th Congressional District seat for Wisconsin's representative in Congress. So very cool, Tom. Nice to meet you, and good to have you back.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Ryan.
You stopped in during the holiday parade here in December.
Yeah, I stopped in during the holiday parade. Wonderful holiday parade.
Yeah.
Got to meet a lot of people, and yeah, it was just terrific. And thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So we're going to try and sit down with all the candidates for this race. Again, there is a important primary for those of you who don't know or are just finding out about it. It's February 18th, correct, Tom?
That is correct.
All right. And it is this, the vacated congressional seat by Representative Duffy. And you are one of 4 people vying for that seat. And it is a, what am I trying to think of, Tom? It's
a special election.
A special election,
Yeah.
but it is a partisan primary election, correct?
It is a partisan primary.
So you can only vote for one party or the other.
That is correct.
And that's the way we do it here in Wisconsin.
That's the way it is in Wisconsin. But that is correct. There's 2 candidates running on the Republican side, 2 running on the Democrat side, and I'm running as a Republican.
Correct.
Yep.
And you are serving your community right now, currently in the state Senate as well. And you've done that for how long?
Yeah,
has that been?
I'm completing my 2nd term in the state Senate. I came into the legislature in 2010, and after spending a long career owning, operating businesses, things like that. Yeah.
Cool. Tell us a little bit about your history and why you're running for this spot.
Yeah. No, thanks for the question. So I grew up on a dairy farm here in western Wisconsin, not that far south of here, a little town, Elmwood, Wisconsin, and 5 brothers, 2 sisters, and just a great upbringing, classic Wisconsin farm family, big farm family. Nice. And went to college at River Falls, got an agricultural degree, used that for about 7 years, worked in southern Minnesota near Rochester, Minnesota, and then the company I was with wanted me to move further west, out towards Sioux Falls, and I was just like, I come from the hills and valleys of western Wisconsin, not going there. So anyhow, at that point, I just picked up stakes and was not married at the time, and so it was easy at that point.
Sure.
And moved up to Minocqua about 30 years ago. And
beautiful area.
Yeah, it's just a gorgeous place, and been a great place to live all these years. My wife, I met my wife there. She was born and raised there. Or I should say she was raised there. Her dad was in the Navy, and she was born down in Jacksonville, Florida. But anyhow, raised our family there. Chris and I owned Wilderness Cruises for 2 decades. It was a dinner and excursion boat on the Willow Flowage near Minocqua. And I just, as I go through town, I see the sign for like Dairy State Bank, and I kind of chuckle because they used to bring groups on our boat all the time. So we had lots of Rice Lakers that came here, or came to our business over the years. We sold that business about 6 years ago, and but it's great. I've owned and managed small businesses my entire life. And then in 2010, I saw what was going on in the state of Wisconsin. We had about a $3 billion deficit, and unemployment was almost double digits. Jobs were fleeing Wisconsin. And I just said, time out, we got to do better here. And I came in with a whole bunch of like-minded people, and we changed Wisconsin. Worked with Governor Walker and other legislators. By the way, Governor Walker has endorsed me for this race. And we changed a lot of stuff. Those deficits that we talked about back in 2010, almost a decade ago, they're gone. And so we've had balanced budgets now. We have the largest rainy day fund in the history of the state of Wisconsin, and if you can find a job if you want a good job here in Wisconsin at this point. Unemployment is at historic lows, and that's probably the thing I'm most proud of is people want to have a good job in Wisconsin, they can have it, and I believe our policies have helped make that happen. And the other thing that's happened is the average wage earner is making more money these days. When you look at wages, they're steadily rising in this economy. And that's the best thing possible when working people make more money. So those are all good things. And so now I look at Washington, D.C., and it's pretty well broken. I think most people would agree.
Yeah, I don't think you'd find too much disagreement, but yeah.
Yeah, great frustration on the part of people, what's going on out there. And I think I can bring my talents to Washington, D.C. now, similar to the things that I've done in Madison, where I've been a real reformer, I've been a conservative reformer, and I believe we can do better out in Washington, D.C. And that's the message I'm bringing to every corner of the district.
Very good. It is quite a big district, the largest in the state. How do you go about getting input from those residents throughout the 7th Congressional District?
You get up early.
Yeah.
And you stay up late. That's for the primary way in which we do it. But no, we go to every corner of the district. Like today, we started out, I left home, went up to Hayward, went on to Spooner, Rice Lake. I mean, we're getting to every corner of the district. Last Friday, I was in Grantsburg, spending time in Superior and stuff like that. In fact, to kind of draw the parameters of the district, and this is very loose, but you're basically running from Wausau to Marshfield to Hudson and everything north. Mm-hmm. That is basically the parameters of the 7th Congressional. So it is a very large district, and you just got to get out and visit people. You got to travel and put a lot of miles on a vehicle. But I'm used to that, mm-hmm. having been in the Senate district that I'm in the second largest geographical Senate district in the state of Wisconsin. So I'm used to the travel, used to really getting out and having to travel to get to meet people.
Very good.
Yeah.
Tom, you know, you had mentioned how broken it seems like Washington, D.C. was. What kind of things could you possibly do that you've already done in the Senate for Wisconsin that would help Congress in D.C.?
Yeah, one of the big reasons that I ran for the state legislature is that $3.6 billion deficit that we had in 2010. And those deficits are unsustainable, and we should not leave them for our children. If you look right now, what do we have, like $23 trillion? It's a really big number.
Yeah.
And but it equates to $70,000 for every man, woman, and child. And you think about a kid being born today, and they have a debt of $70,000 that they have to pay. I mean, that's not fair to the next the next generation and coming generations. So it will not be easy to fix, but it wasn't easy in Wisconsin here either. And it's going to take a whole series of good budgets in order to make that happen. So I think that's a big thing that needs to go on. We need to secure the border. There's really no reason that we haven't gotten a border agreement. I think President Trump is willing to do that, and we need like-minded people working together to accomplish that. And healthcare, huge issue, and I look forward to working on issues like that that are really substantial, because that's what I did in the state legislature. I dealt with big issues day after day, and I think that's part of our duty as legislators to do that.
Let's talk about agriculture, because I know that's a little bit of your background, and you know, we've heard for several years now that it's a struggle. You want a hot tip? The hot tip is don't farm. It's sadly becoming a reality. What ideas do you have to help small farms or even larger farms? But you know, we see so many smaller family farms falling by the wayside. Is there anything to bring those back, or how can we help those folks in agriculture?
So I believe there continues to be a place for small farms. Not just in Wisconsin, but across America. And so I think there's still a future there. I have brothers and sisters that still farm, and I talk to them regularly, and it's tough. It's been a real tough slog the last 5 or 6 years. And so I think there's some things that can be done. First of all, we need to make sure that farms aren't regulated to such an extent that it costs them so much money to meet regulations. And I think of a proposal that came out a few years ago called the Waters of the United States, where every drop of water in the United States would be regulated. Something like that would really hurt agriculture. I think President Trump did a good job of renegotiating the NAFTA agreement. We now have USMCA. It looks like USMCA is going to be ratified. that's going to be a good thing for agriculture.
What's the status on that currently? Could you remind us?
Yeah.
Did the House pass it and then the Senate has yet to, or is
I think that's correct.
Okay.
I think
All right.
the House has passed it, and I think it's just a matter of ratification by the Senate.
Okay.
And hopefully that will happen soon.
And President Trump should certainly sign it.
Yes.
Shouldn't have any problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The president negotiated it and has moved it forward. I certainly would vote for it. I think it's a good agreement. I mean, it's I believe in free trade, but it also should be fair trade. It should be fair and free trade, and I think that's very much been President Trump's mantra from the beginning, that let's make sure we have fair trade deals for the people of America that work for Americans, and I very much agree with that. And then the next step is with China to make sure that we have good trade deals with them also, and I really agree. And it's interesting. I talked to some of my family members at farm. And you kind of wonder, do they continue to support President Trump on this issue in spite of the real concerns that are there? And they do. They're like, we understand that China needs to be taken on here in terms of they're stealing our intellectual property, they're belligerent to their neighbors, and all you have to do is look at what's going on in Hong Kong and actually right in their home country, not just their neighbors. And people know that this needs to be dealt with, and I think President Trump hopefully will be able to get there. Very
good. Senator Tiffany, another thing, and I'm sure you get asked about it a lot, transportation.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? I know, infrastructure is a huge thing, and then there's so many other things, rail, the situations with flying, the Boeing situation, which is kind of their own problem. But whatever your thoughts are on transportation and how you would affect that. Or what.
Yeah, I've kind of put that under a heading of infrastructure. And as a state legislator, I've always believed that there's kind of tier one and then there's tier two issues. And tier one are those most important issues. And I've always put education there, healthcare, and transportation, infrastructure. And not that there isn't more than that, but those are kind of the big three. And like in this state budget, we put in $400 million more into transportation. And when you look at the schedule for the Department of Transportation and road projects, many of them are going to be moved up now on our state highways. Or I shouldn't say many, some are going to be moved up, which is really a good thing. And so we certainly need to do that. But as your congressman, this will be a priority of mine. And it won't just be roads. It'll be all of our infrastructure. We need to make sure that our sewer and water systems are up to date. I mean, we see many communities that have they have pipes underground that are 100 years old.
Yeah.
And so there's a great need there. But it's ports, airports, rail, pipelines, all these things. We need to make sure we modernize our infrastructure for the 21st century so that it will hold up through the 21st century. Because, I mean, if you can't turn on the lights and you can't flush the toilet, there's a problem. And so infrastructure does those things, and we need to make sure we have those things in place. And I'd give you another example, something that I had put under the heading of job security, economic security, and national security is pipelines. We need to make sure we have a good pipeline infrastructure in our country because we are now energy independent in our country. That is one of the greatest things we've done for our national security. We are no longer dependent on those Middle Eastern countries, some who do not like us. And in order to move that energy, to be able to move that oil, gas, and stuff like that, we need good pipelines and good infrastructure in order to do that. In fact, just north of us here, Superior, of course, had their refinery go down a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And it's really good news that Husky Refining out of Calgary is going to rebuild that facility because that provides asphalt for this region up here. Great to have that right close to us, as well as they do produce some propane, which we tend to be more heavily dependent on.
Especially in the winter, this time of year,
But especially rural Wisconsin, more than natural gas.
Yeah, I know there was a shortage, I feel like a couple of years ago too, that really spiked prices up. Senator, another thing that kind of goes in along with that infrastructure idea, and that's huge in the 7th Congressional District, would be broadband. I know the legislature has done a lot of work on broadband. I feel like I've been sitting down here with Senator Bewley, who represents our district, and Representative Quinn, and constantly I've been doing shows for I think several years now, and it's always a constant thing that we're working towards better infrastructure for broadband and better coverage. What role does Congress play in that, and what are your thoughts on broadband?
Big priority. And we started the rural broadband program in Wisconsin at the state level about 4 budgets ago. Started out with $500,000. It's now up to almost $45 million. So really been putting money into that. There's hundreds of millions of dollars that are allocated at the federal level. And I think we need to make sure that those dollars are being used effectively. And so there's some local providers. I think about like Norvado, north of here. We were there today visiting with them. They're doing a really good job of using those dollars most effectively. I think some of the bigger players could be more effective in using those dollars and getting it out here in Wisconsin to benefit these rural areas, which is what it was meant for. Mm-hmm. So I really look forward to digging into that and using those dollars more effectively. I mean, one thing that we could do there is we could exempt that from the Davis-Bacon law. The Davis-Bacon law is what they call, also referred to as prevailing wage. It puts additional burdens on the provider in paying the wages for those, for the installations that are done. And we received an estimate today that it costs about 15 to 20% more as a result of that law. That law was put in place back in the 1930s, and it's really antiquated at this point and unnecessary. I think it should be exempted from the Davis-Bacon law.
All right.
And that would allow us to be able to roll even more fiber out to get more broadband to people here in Wisconsin. But this will be a big priority of mine. I think it's important.
The Davis-Bacon law is something I'm going to have to look up now. I'm curious about that. And then, with that infrastructure and broadband being built more to the rural areas, how do you, I feel like that's helpful, but there is a draw to the younger population, to urban areas. And more rural communities are looking for young people to fill jobs. I guess my question is, what can we do to help the rural communities throughout the 7th District to help fill those job opportunities?
Yeah, so, I mean, every employer you talk to has job openings, right? And so it's a real challenge after the boom generation has gone through, where you just have fewer kids. So that, I mean, that's one of the concerns that you start with. And but I do think that broadband, good infrastructure are things that can be done. And I think you also give flexibility to local communities to do things that they think are best for them. And because you see some communities putting in more amenities, whether it's parks or if they do bike trails, something like that. And I think it's important to be able to allow those to be put in place. And probably at the federal level, the greatest thing we can do is make sure that we have fewer regulations, less red tape that causes those things to cost more, because sometimes that discourages a local community like Rice Lake from being able to do those things. And so I think just the federal government, from the federal government's perspective, just have them back off a little bit in terms of rules and regulations. I think that could be most helpful. And it's an area that I very much agree with President Trump, where he's talked about getting rid of 2 regulations for every regulation that's created. I think he's spot on with that. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've got books and reams of regulations out in Washington, D.C. We should really bring that control back to the state and local level, and we'll do a much better job in that way.
Do you have any anecdotes or any stories where that takes place and where where
The regulatory
yeah,
stuff?
yep,
Yeah,
yep.
let me give you a quick
Yeah,
example.
yeah.
So right over in Rhinelander, near where I live, there's a paper mill there that was at one time, a decade ago, was almost close to closure. But they remade themselves. They have a new product that they've been producing over the last decade for the airline industry that is really given them growth. But they had to put in a new smokestack as a result of a regulation by the bureaucracy out in Washington, D.C., something called Boiler Act. And it had to do with coal burning plants. Well, they put in a $13 million stack, a new stack that supposedly would reduce emissions, right? And we're all in favor of that.
yeah.
Cleaner environment, less emissions, all the rest. Well, it turns out that stack reduced emissions this much. There was no reduction in emissions as a result of building that. It was just the brainchild of the bureaucracy out in Washington, D.C. And as a result of that, they had to come to Oneida County, the citizens of Oneida County, to get a loan to expand their business because they had burned up their $13 billion in capital for that year building this new smokestack. It's those kind of things that happen out in Washington, D.C. that really harm our local communities, and that was the case certainly in Rhinelander. And another area, Ryan, that I would really focus on in regards to federal regulations and rules is health care. The Affordable Care Act that was passed 10 years ago has driven up the cost of insurance, the cost of health care, and really given people less options also in getting their health care. We need to bring that back to the state and local level and allow local people to be able to make decisions in regards to their health care and allow more options. Because if we allow more options, then people will find a better way to get their healthcare needs. Because our healthcare needs are all individualized, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the cookie cutter approach from the federal government does not work.
Sure. And there's a lot of different providers as well throughout the country that maybe know their own systems better than the federal government.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Back in when the Affordable Care Act was started a decade ago in 2009, we hear a lot about pre-existing conditions and covering that. We were doing that in Wisconsin for 80,000 people, where we had a state program called HRSP. Some of our viewers will remember that program, and it was meant to take care of those people with high needs, and the state was helping with that. And the Affordable Care Act wiped out our HRSP program in Wisconsin. It made it illegal to have it. We should allow the states to be able to have a high-risk program that deals with those people with pre-existing conditions. We can do it better, state and local level, rather than doing it at the federal level. And if I could just, another minute on this. I've seen local businesses, there's a company that I'm very familiar with, Merrill Steel in Wausau. They brought their own clinic in their business. They have their own clinic, and they even have their own mobile unit to do house calls. Mm-hmm. So think about it. You got a clinic within a business, and they do house calls, and they brought down the cost of their health care for their employees by bringing it in-house. We need to allow greater flexibility so people can find their own solutions.
Very good. Senator, education is another thing that you're very, that you value. What are your thoughts on education, and what is Congress going to do? I know a lot of folks are worried about debt, student loan debt, and the cost of higher ed. What can we do to help young folks make it through their second or their education?
Yeah, so I'm going to cover your question, college, second.
Sure.
But in regards to like K-12 education, I actually believe the federal government should do far less. Every state has a Department of Education. What they do at the federal level is redundant, really not necessary. I mean, I have 3 kids that have went through the public school system, and some of the mandates that the federal government, I mean, once again, we're talking about regulations and mandates coming from the federal level, really end up costing our schools more than the benefit that they're getting from it. And it would be much better. At a minimum, what should happen is our federal government should return the money to the states for K-12 education as a block grant and allow the states to do with those dollars what they choose to, because the mandates that come from the federal level really have not been effective. I mean, I'll give you a quick example. There's they've been mandating a number of years now on what they can serve in the school lunch program. And I've had cooks come to me and say, tell them to stop it, because we're throwing away far more food than we used to, and we're not meeting the dietary requirements of the kids in our school. And so it's those kind of things that come from the federal level that are ineffective. So as far as college debt, we've done something about it in Wisconsin. I've voted to freeze tuition here in Wisconsin. And for the average Wisconsin kid that goes on to the UW system, if you complete in 4 years, compared to where we were before the tuition freeze, average family and that student will save over $5,000 as a result of the tuition freeze, making college more affordable. Now, I don't think we should just forgive college debt. Perhaps there's some things we can do in regards to interest rates, things like that, that could perhaps be helpful. But I don't think, so I have 2 daughters in college, and if all of a sudden the federal government was going to say, we're going to pay for all their college debt, I think that's unfair to the people who don't have college debt. That really would be unfair to make another citizen pay for our family's choices. And so I think there's better ways to go about it. And one of them is what we've done here in Wisconsin in freezing college tuition. And perhaps there's some other ways in regards to student loan interest rates, things like that at the federal level, that would be more effective.
All right. Senator, I know you're a sportsman. We had a little discussion about the Ruffed Grouse Society,
Yeah.
but CWD is kind of a big, growing concern for hunters in Wisconsin. What are your thoughts on what the federal government can do, or I'm not sure what your stance is on how the state has made actions towards stopping the spread of this, but I think it's kind of a national problem now. What could you do about this in Congress, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, certainly willing to look at it. Need to make sure that we're just not throwing good money after bad. What we did in the state about 15 years ago is we spent $45 million, I think it's now up to over $50 million, on CWD work, research, that type of stuff, and really are no closer to a solution. And we use sportsmen's dollars to do that. We need to make sure that we're not just throwing money away saying, okay, let's do something, because that something has not gotten improvement here in Wisconsin. So we need to make sure that we're spending those dollars, wisely. But I think just in terms of, in general, I belong to the Ruffed Grouse Society. I think it's a terrific organization. It emphasizes early successional species that we need for game species. I think it's all about opportunity for sportsmen. Whether you're fishing, hunting, whatever, we need to make sure we allow as much opportunity as possible. And one of the greatest impediments for hunters at this point is the wolf population here in northern Wisconsin. It is one of the first bills that I will introduce into Congress is to delist the timber wolf here in Wisconsin. And I will work tirelessly to make that happen, because it's been very disruptive for farmers, very disruptive for sportsmen, even has affected real estate values for some people that own a 40 or an 80, a hunting 40, hunting 80, whatever. Those have been devalued now here in northern Wisconsin as a result of what's happened. And so I believe wildlife populations should be managed by the state, not by the federal government. And I will make sure and follow through with that as a congressman.
I know I visited some friends in Superior this weekend, and we don't have any wolves around here, but they certainly do outside of Superior. They're very aware of the problem. Their hunting success or lack of success, and then just something as simple as taking your child to the end of the road for the school bus and having a wolf come up. That's pretty terrifying for a parent of young children.
Yeah, I mean, it's been very disruptive here in northern Wisconsin. I mean, we were told originally, and it's still the wolf goal is 100 wolves for not just Wisconsin, but Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. That still continues to be the wolf goal. And I mean, we're at 1,000 minimum, and you talk to serious sportsmen, they'll tell you there's far more than 1,000 wolves here in Wisconsin, including in this area. I mean, you have them around here also. And it's been very disruptive, hard on farmers. And it isn't so much that wolves kill livestock or whatever, it's the unrest that they create amongst animals that are out there, if it's beef cows, dairy cows, whatever, and they get a loss of production as a result of that. That's actually the biggest harm that they do in when they're close to livestock. It's not just the killing of the livestock, it is just the disruption they create and the loss of production that happens to farms. And it's time to restore management to the state level. Let us manage them. We'll do it much better than the federal government.
We could go on about the ESA and how that's been treated, but boy, anything else that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to cover that you feel that it's important for voters to know?
Yeah. So, I mean, I really support some of the things that President Trump has done here over the last few years that he's been in office. I think about the tax cuts, putting more money in people's pockets. That's really worked for America. I mean, it's part of the reason why we continue to see this great growth in our economy, and our economy has been so strong. Great optimism out there amongst business people, including small business people. And I really support him and will work with him on this reducing 2 regulations for every regulation that's created, because I've done that at the state level, and it's really benefited people. When you get rid of, we all want to have appropriate regulations, but we don't want to be over-regulated. At this point, we're over-regulated from the federal level. We need to pare that back. The other thing that, of course, that's happened recently is President Trump taking out Soleimani from Iran. And I very much agree with that. And I think we're seeing the results of it when the Iranian people now are standing up against their leadership, having protests, saying, we don't want our country to continue on that path. President Trump has clearly shown that we need to be strong as a country. And when we do that, freedom-loving people, including the average Iranian, they don't want to be at war. They don't want to take the path that the mullahs have been taking. And I think President Trump is really doing the right thing there. And I believe will ultimately lead to a more peaceful world by us being strong as America. And the other thing that I've seen, here over the last week or two with that Middle Eastern situation, he's made sure that our troops have been kept safe. And that's greatly appreciated, I think, by all Americans. And it goes back to President Reagan's saying, peace through strength. And President Trump is doing that at this point. And it's the most important thing that he does is protect our national security as a president, and he's doing that job well.
All right, very good. Senator, thank you so much for coming in. Be certain to make it out to the polls on February 18th, or send in that absentee ballot, whatever you prefer, but make sure to vote and get your vote counted. Thank you so much for coming in, and we'll hopefully see you again.
Yeah, urge everyone to fulfill that civic duty to vote. It's a terrific thing that we get to do as Americans, is get to go to the ballot box and decide who's going to represent us, and I hope to earn people's vote and support here on February 18th.
Tom, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ryan.